3 months after my husband's death, the estate lawyer called me. "Ma'am, I found something in his papers. Come to my office. Don't tell your son yet. You need to see this first. What he showed me changed everything. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." 3 months. That's how long I'd been a widow when everything I thought I knew about my life crumbled in a single phone call. I was sitting in Conrad's old chair, the brown leather one that still smelled faintly of his cologne, sorting through sympathy cards I couldn't bring myself to throw away. The house felt too quiet, too empty. Even though it was the same house we'd shared for 38 years. At 67, I was learning what silence truly meant. When the phone rang that Tuesday morning, I almost didn't answer. Most calls these days were either telemarketers or well-meaning neighbors checking if I needed anything. But something made me reach for it. "Mrs. Morrison, this is David Garrett, your husband's attorney." I straightened in the chair. We'd already handled the will reading weeks ago. Everything had been straightforward. The house to me, savings split between me and Marcus, our son. What more could there be? "Mr. Garrett, hello. Is there something wrong with the paperwork?" There was a pause that made my stomach clench. "Mrs. Morrison, I found something in Conrad's papers that requires immediate attention. I need you to come to my office today if possible." "What kind of something?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Ma'am, I'd rather discuss this in person. And Mrs. Morrison, don't mention this call to your son yet. You need to see this first." The way he said it sent ice through my veins. In 43 years of marriage, I'd learned to recognize the tone men used when they were about to deliver news that would change everything. 2 hours later, I sat across from David Garrett's mahogany desk, my hands folded tightly in my lap to stop them from trembling. He was a thin man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, but today those eyes held something I'd never seen before: pity. "Mrs. Morrison, what I'm about to show you is difficult. Conrad left very specific instructions that this was only to be revealed after his death, and only to you first." He slid a manila envelope across the desk. My name was written on it in Conrad's familiar handwriting, but underneath, in red ink, were the words, "Private, for Muriel's eyes only." "There's more than one will?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. A second will, executed just 6 months ago. Conrad was very secretive about it. He came here alone, insisted I keep it in a separate safety deposit box. My fingers felt numb as I opened the envelope. Inside was a document with official seals and signatures, but the words blurred together as I tried to read. Then one name jumped out at me like a slap across the face: Helena Martinez. "Who is Helena Martinez?" I managed to ask. David cleared his throat uncomfortably. "According to this document, she's the primary beneficiary of your husband's estate. The house, the savings accounts, the life insurance policy, everything except a small provision for you." The room spun. I gripped the arms of my chair trying to process what he'd just said. That's impossible. Conrad and we've been married for 43 years. Why would he? "Mrs. Morrison, there's more." David's voice was gentle but firm. "This Helena Martinez has been receiving monthly payments from your husband for the past 16 years. Significant amounts. I have the bank records here." He produced another folder, thick with financial statements. My eyes scanned the numbers. $2,000 every month, like clockwork, transferred to an account I'd never heard of. For 16 years. How was this possible? I handled our finances. I balanced our checkbooks. It appears Conrad maintained separate accounts you weren't aware of. The money came from a business account tied to his consulting work. My mind reeled. Conrad had retired from his engineering job 8 years ago, but he'd continued doing small consulting projects from home. He'd always said the extra money went into our retirement fund. I'd trusted him completely. "Mr. Garrett, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." My voice was steadier now, though my heart was racing. "In your professional opinion, was my husband planning to leave me?" David removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture I recognized as someone buying time to choose their words carefully. "Mrs. Morrison, based on what I've seen here, It appears Conrad was planning a significant life change. The timing of this second will, combined with the financial arrangements. Yes, I believe he may have been considering leaving you. The words hit me like physical blows. 16 years. Helena Martinez had been in our lives for 16 years, and I'd known nothing about her. While I'd been taking care of Conrad through his diabetes diagnosis, his minor heart attack 3 years ago, his struggles with retirement, he'd been supporting another woman. There's something else, David continued quietly. This address for Helena Martinez, it's not an apartment. It's a house that Conrad helped purchase. He slid another document across the desk. A deed. Conrad's name was on it as a co-signer for a mortgage on a 3-bedroom house in Riverside, just 20 minutes from our own home. He bought her a house? The down payment was $50,000, paid from one of his consulting accounts. The monthly mortgage payments match exactly with the monthly transfers to her account. I stared at the address, 427 Maple Drive. Such an ordinary address for something that was destroying my entire world. Mrs. Morrison, are you all right? Can I get you some water? I realized I'd been holding my breath. No, thank you. I need to understand. If Conrad died with this second will in place, what does that mean for me? David's expression grew even more somber. The second will supersedes the first. You would receive a monthly allowance of $1,000 and the right to remain in the house for 1 year. After that, everything transfers to Helena Martinez. $1,000 a month. After 43 years of marriage, after raising his son, after standing by him through every challenge and celebration, Conrad had valued my life at $1,000 a month. What about Marcus? What does he get in this second will? Your son receives $25,000 in Conrad's tools from the garage. That's all. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Marcus, who'd worshipped his father, who'd named his own son after him, was worth $25,000 and some rusty tools. Mr. Garrett, I need to ask you something else. Is this second will legal? Can it be challenged? That's exactly what we need to discuss. The will itself appears to be legally sound, but there are several irregularities I'd like to investigate further. The timing, the secrecy, the fact that you were completely unaware of these financial arrangements. There may be grounds to contest it. I folded my hands in my lap again, forcing myself to think clearly despite the chaos in my mind. What kind of irregularities? Well, for one, the witnesses on this second will are people I don't recognize. They're not my staff, and Conrad specifically requested that I not be present during the signing. He came in after hours. That's highly unusual. And, additionally, the fact that he kept this from you while making significant financial commitments in your name, the house mortgage, for instance, could be considered fraudulent misrepresentation. A spark of something fierce ignited in my chest. After 16 years of betrayal, after planning to discard me like unwanted furniture, Conrad might have made a crucial mistake. What do you recommend? First, we need to determine exactly who Helena Martinez is and what her relationship with your husband was. Second, we need a complete audit of all Conrad's financial accounts. And third, we need to decide whether to inform your son about this situation. The thought of telling Marcus made me feel sick. How do you tell your adult child that his father, the man he idolized, was preparing to abandon his family for another woman? How long do I have to make these decisions? The second will requires probate just like the first. We have several months before anything becomes final. But, Mrs. Morrison, I strongly recommend we begin investigating immediately. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands, weighted with secrets and betrayal. Mr. Garrett, I want you to find out everything about Helena Martinez. Everything. And I don't want Marcus to know about this until I decide how to tell him. Of course. Mrs. Morrison, I know this is overwhelming, but you should know that you have options. This isn't over. As I walked back to my car, Conrad's betrayal settled into my bones like a deep winter chill. But underneath the pain, something else was growing. Something that felt dangerous and necessary. For 43 years, I'd been the dutiful wife, the supportive mother, the woman who never made waves. I'd trusted completely and been deceived completely. But Conrad had made one critical error in his planning. He'd died before he could execute his escape plan, leaving behind evidence of his betrayal. And now, for the first time in my life, I was going to fight back. The question was, who exactly was Helena Martinez, and what had my husband promised her that was worth destroying our family for? The drive to Riverside should have taken 20 minutes. I made it in 15, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. 427 Maple Drive. The address had burned itself into my mind during 3 sleepless nights since leaving David Garrett's office. I'd told myself I was just going to drive by, just to see what kind of house Conrad had helped buy for another woman. I wasn't planning to stop, wasn't planning to confront anyone. I was just a 67-year-old widow trying to understand how her life had become a lie. But as I turned onto Maple Drive, my breath caught in my throat. The house was beautiful. Not just nice. Beautiful. A craftsman-style home with a wraparound porch, mature oak trees in the front yard, and flower boxes under every window. The kind of house I'd dreamed of when Conrad and I were young and planning our future together. The kind of house he'd always said we couldn't afford. I parked 3 houses down, engine running, hands shaking as I stared at what $50,000 of my husband's secret money had purchased. The garage door was open, revealing a silver Honda Civic that looked maybe 2 years old. Another expense I'd known nothing about. A movement on the porch caught my attention. A woman emerged from the front door, and my heart nearly stopped. She was younger than me, maybe 50, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of naturally tanned skin that spoke of someone who spent time outdoors. She wore jeans and a simple white blouse, and even from a distance, I could see she was attractive in an effortless way that I'd never been. But what made my blood run cold was what happened next. A teenage girl bounded out of the house behind her, laughing about something, and threw her arms around the woman's waist in an affectionate hug. The girl had dark hair like the woman, but her facial features, the shape of her nose, the way she tilted her head when she laughed, she looked exactly like Marcus had at that age. I felt bile rise in my throat as the impossible truth crashed over me. This wasn't just about Conrad having an affair. This wasn't even just about him planning to leave me for another woman. Helena Martinez had a daughter who was clearly Conrad's child. My husband hadn't just been supporting another woman for 16 years. He'd been supporting another family. The girl looked to be about 16, which meant I did the math with growing horror. Conrad would have started his affair when Marcus was in college, when our own son was struggling to find his place in the world and needed his father's attention. Instead, Conrad had been creating a second family. I watched as Helena and the girl got into the Honda and backed out of the driveway. Without thinking, I found myself following them at a safe distance. They drove to the local high school where the teenager hopped out with a cheerful wave. Helena waited until the girl disappeared into the building before driving away. I followed her to a small medical office complex, where she parked in a space marked, "Reserved for Helena Martinez, RN." A nurse. Conrad had fallen in love with a nurse who was 15 years younger and had given her everything I'd been denied. Sitting in that parking lot, watching Helena walk into her workplace in scrubs covered with cheerful cartoon characters, I felt something inside me break open. Not just heartbreak, rage. Pure, clean rage that burned away 43 years of being the understanding wife, the woman who never questioned, never demanded, never fought for what she deserved. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with questions that demanded answers. How long had Conrad known about the daughter? Had he been present for her birth, her first steps, her first day of school? While I'd been attending Marcus's college graduation alone because Conrad had claimed he was sick, had he actually been at his secret daughter's 16th birthday party? Back in my kitchen, I opened the laptop Marcus had bought me for Christmas 2 years ago. I'd barely used it, but suddenly I needed to know everything about Helena Martinez. It didn't take long to find her on social media. Her Facebook profile was mostly private, but I could see enough. Photos of her with the teenager, whose name was Sophia, according to the tags. Pictures of family barbecues, school events, vacation trips to places Conrad had always said we couldn't afford to visit. And then I found something that made my hands tremble so violently I nearly dropped the laptop. A photo from Sophia's 16th birthday party, just 3 months ago. A beautiful cake, balloons, a house full of smiling people, and there, in the background, barely visible but unmistakably present, was Conrad. He'd been at his secret daughter's birthday party a week before his heart attack. A week before, he'd told me he was too tired for Marcus to visit, that he needed quiet time to rest. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when I found Helena's nursing license information online. She worked at the same cardiac rehabilitation center where Conrad had done his therapy after his heart attack 3 years ago. That's where they'd met. While I'd been driving him to appointments twice a week, worried sick about his health, he'd been falling in love with his nurse. I closed the laptop and sat in my empty kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a marriage that had apparently ended years ago without anyone telling me. The phone rang. Marcus. "Hi, Mom. Just checking on you. You sounded strange when I called yesterday." I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, seeing a woman I no longer recognized. "I'm fine, honey. Just adjusting to everything." "Listen, I've been thinking about Dad's things in the garage. I know it's hard, but we should probably start going through them soon. There might be tools I could use, and some of the equipment could be valuable." Tools. In Conrad's secret will, Marcus was inheriting tools and $25,000, while Helena Martinez got everything else. My son had no idea he'd been written out of his father's life just as completely as I had. "Marcus, can I ask you something? Did your father ever mention anyone named Helena to you?" A pause. "Helena? No, I don't think so. Why?" "Oh, I just found some paperwork with that name on it. Probably nothing." "Okay, well, I'll try to come by this weekend to help with the garage, if that's all right." After he hung up, I sat in the growing darkness, thinking about everything I'd discovered. Conrad hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed Marcus, too. Our son worshipped his father's memory, spoke of him with the kind of reverence reserved for heroes. How could I destroy that? How could I tell him that his father had been planning to abandon us both for a woman 15 years younger and the daughter he'd never known he had? But more than that, how could I let Helena Martinez inherit everything Conrad and I had built together while she sat in her beautiful house, completely unaware that her secret lover had been married to another woman for their entire relationship? Because that's what was becoming clear to me. Helena's social media showed no indication that she'd known Conrad was married. There were no guilty posts, no references to a complicated relationship. She posted photos of family dinners and school events like a woman who believed she was in a committed, honest relationship. Conrad had lied to both of us. The question now was what I was going to do about it. I could contest the will, fight it in court, drag everything into the open, but that would mean destroying not just Helena's world, but Sophia's too. A 16-year-old girl who'd just lost the father she'd probably adored. Or I could do nothing. Let Helena inherit everything, take my $1,000 a month, and live out my remaining years in quiet poverty while she enjoyed the fruits of my 43 years of sacrifice. Neither option felt like justice. But as I sat in my husband's chair, breathing in the lingering scent of his cologne, a third option began to take shape in my mind, something that would require patience, careful planning, and a kind of steel I'd never had to develop before. Conrad had spent 16 years building a lie. Maybe it was time someone spent a little time dismantling it. The question was, how much did Helena Martinez really know about the man she'd loved? And what would she do when she learned the truth about Conrad Morrison? I had a feeling I was about to find out. Marcus arrived on Saturday morning with his usual confidence, whistling as he walked through my front door like he owned the place. At 39, he'd inherited Conrad's tall frame and my stubborn streak, though lately I'd been wondering if stubbornness was the only thing he'd gotten from me. "Morning, Mom. Ready to tackle Dad's stuff?" He headed straight for the coffee pot, helping himself like he still lived here. "I brought some boxes from work, and I figured we could donate most of it. No point keeping tools that'll just rust in your garage." I watched him pour coffee into Conrad's favorite mug, the one that said "World's Greatest Dad," and felt something twist in my stomach. 7 days had passed since I'd discovered the truth about Helena Martinez, and I hadn't slept more than a few hours any night. Marcus, meanwhile, looked relaxed and refreshed, already planning how to divvy up his father's possessions. "Actually, Marcus, I need to talk to you about something first." "Sure, but can it wait? I promised Jenny I'd be home by 3 to help with Connor's soccer practice." He glanced at his watch. "We should probably start in the garage while it's still cool out there." "Marcus, sit down, please." Something in my voice must have gotten through to him because he finally looked at me directly. Really looked. I could see him taking in the dark circles under my eyes, the way my hands shook slightly as I reached for my own coffee cup. "Mom, are you okay? You look like you haven't been sleeping." "I haven't been. There's something about your father. Something I need to tell you." Marcus set down his coffee and leaned forward. And for a moment he looked like the concerned son I'd raised, the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard when I was sad. "What is it? Did something happen with the insurance? The house?" I took a deep breath. "Marcus, did your father ever mention anyone named Helena Martinez to you?" The change in his expression was subtle, but unmistakable. A slight tightening around his eyes, a pause that lasted just a heartbeat too long. "Helena? No, I don't think so." "Why?" He was lying. I'd spent 39 years reading his face, and Marcus had never been good at deception. The same little muscle in his jaw that used to twitch when he was 7, and claiming he hadn't broken the neighbor's window was twitching now. "Marcus, I know you're lying to me." His face flushed. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I don't know anyone named Helena. Your father had another will, a secret will that leaves everything to her. The house, the savings, everything. You get $25,000 and his tools." The words hung in the air between us. Marcus stared at me, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like relief. "That's impossible. Dad would never—" "She has a daughter, Marcus, a 16-year-old daughter who looks exactly like you did at that age." Now his face went completely white. He stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "Mom, you're upset. You're imagining things. Grief can make people—" "I'm not imagining anything." The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "I've seen the bank records. Your father has been sending her $2,000 every month for 16 years. He helped her buy a house. He was at her daughter's birthday party 3 months ago." Marcus began pacing around my small kitchen, running his hands through his hair the way he used to do as a teenager when he was caught in a lie. "Okay, let's say this is true. Let's say Dad had some relationship. That doesn't mean anything legally. You were his wife. You have rights. So you did know." He stopped pacing. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the kitchen where I'd made him thousands of meals, helped him with homework, listened to his teenage heartbreaks. "I didn't know everything," he said finally. "But yes, I knew about Helena." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own son had known about his father's secret life and said nothing, had let me grieve for a man who'd been planning to abandon me. "How long have you known?" Marcus slumped back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 39 years. "About 5 years. Dad told me when I was going through my divorce," he said. "He said sometimes marriages don't work out, and a man has to think about his future." His future. "Mom, it wasn't like he was planning to hurt you. He was just unhappy." He felt trapped. Trapped. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. By what? By 43 years of marriage? By the woman who took care of him through his heart attack, his diabetes, his retirement depression? He said you two had grown apart, that you didn't understand each other anymore. I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised us both. "And what about you, Marcus? Did he tell you that in his secret will, you inherit almost nothing?" Marcus's face went very still. "What do you mean?" "I mean Helena gets everything. The house, the life insurance, the savings accounts, everything we built together. You get $25,000 and whatever tools you want from the garage." I watched the reality sink in, saw his face change as he processed what his father's betrayal meant for his own future. The house Marcus had grown up in, the inheritance he'd been counting on for his own children's education, all of it was going to a woman he'd helped his father deceive me about. That can't be right. Dad promised me. He stopped himself, but it was too late. Promised you what, Marcus? Nothing. It's not important. What did your father promise you? When he didn't answer, I felt another piece of my world shift and crack. Marcus, what aren't you telling me? He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. He said when he left you for Helena, I'd get the house. He said you'd be fine, that you could get an apartment somewhere, and I could raise my kids in the house I grew up in. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the wall clock Conrad had given me for our 10th anniversary. I stared at my son, the boy I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through countless illnesses, supported through his own divorce, and realized I was looking at a stranger. You knew he was planning to leave me, and you said nothing. Mom, I didn't think he'd actually do it. I thought it was just talk, just him being frustrated with his life. But you were counting on it, weren't you? You were counting on inheriting this house when your father abandoned me. Marcus's silence was answer enough. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. I think you should go. Mom, please. Let me explain. Explain what? That you helped your father plan to destroy my life? That you've spent 5 years lying to my face while looking forward to the day I'd lose my home? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Marcus? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like both the men in my life decided I was disposable. Marcus grabbed my arm as I tried to walk past him. Mom, please. We can fight this. We can contest the will together. You don't have to be alone in this. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. For just a moment, I saw something genuine there. Real fear at the prospect of losing me too. Together? I pulled my arm free. Like we've been together for the past 5 years while you kept your father's secret? Like we've been together while you both planned my future without consulting me? I was trying to protect you. You were protecting yourself, Marcus. You saw a chance to get something you wanted, and you didn't care what it cost me. I walked to the front door and opened it. I want you to leave. Now. Mom, you're making a mistake. You need me. You can't handle this alone. I turned to face him one last time. I've been handling things alone for years, Marcus. I just didn't know it. He stood in my doorway for a long moment, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to fix this, how to get back into my good graces so he wouldn't lose everything. What about the garage? Dad's tools? According to his secret will, those belong to you anyway, but I wouldn't plan on getting them anytime soon. After he left, I sat in Conrad's chair and cried for the first time since his funeral. Not for him. I was done mourning a man who'd never really loved me. I cried for the family I'd thought I had, for the son I'd raised to be honest and loyal, for the life I'd believed was real. But underneath the tears, something harder was growing. Marcus had made his choice 5 years ago when he decided to side with his father against me. He'd gambled that Conrad's plan would work out in his favor, that he'd end up with the house and I'd be too broken to fight back. He'd bet wrong. Now I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. My husband had betrayed me. My son had betrayed me. And Helena Martinez was about to inherit everything I'd worked for while believing she was the only woman Conrad had ever loved. But Helena didn't know the truth yet. And neither did Sophia, the 16-year-old girl who thought her father had been a single man who'd loved her mother enough to buy her a beautiful house. What would happen when they learned that Conrad Morrison had been married to another woman for their entire relationship? That the man they'd mourned as a devoted partner and father had been living a lie that spanned nearly 2 decades? I had a feeling Helena Martinez and I were going to have a very interesting conversation, and this time, I was going to be the one with the power to change someone's life forever. I spent 3 days planning what I would say to Helena Martinez. 3 days pacing my empty house, rehearsing conversations that ranged from polite to devastating. But when I finally found myself standing on her front porch on Tuesday afternoon, every word I'd practiced fled my mind. The house was even more beautiful up close. Wind chimes hung from the porch ceiling, creating a gentle melody in the afternoon breeze. Flower boxes overflowed with petunias and marigolds, and I could smell something wonderful cooking inside. Maybe pot roast, the same dish I used to make for Conrad every Sunday. Before I could lose my nerve, I rang the doorbell. Helena answered quickly, as if she'd been expecting someone. Up close, she was even prettier than I'd thought, with warm brown eyes and laugh lines that spoke of a woman who smiled often. She wore a simple sundress and an apron dusted with flour, and for a moment I felt like I was looking at a version of myself from 30 years ago. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice friendly but curious. "Are you Helena Martinez?" "Yes, I am. And you are?" I took a deep breath. "My name is Muriel Morrison. I think we need to talk about Conrad." The change in her expression was immediate and heartbreaking. Her face lit up with a smile so genuine, so full of love and grief, that I nearly turned around and walked away. "Oh my goodness, you knew Conrad? Please come in. I'm always happy to meet someone who knew him." She ushered me into a living room that felt like a home in a way mine never had. Family photos covered every surface, and I could see Conrad in many of them, smiling at barbecues, helping Sophia with homework, pushing her on a swing in the backyard. But what struck me most was how relaxed he looked, how genuinely happy. "Please sit down. Can I get you some coffee? I was just baking cookies for Sophia's school fundraiser." I perched on the edge of a comfortable sofa, surrounded by evidence of the life Conrad had built here. "Helena, before we go any further, I need to ask you something. How did you know Conrad?" Her smile softened with memory. "We met at the cardiac rehab center where I work. He was such a sweet man, so worried about his health, but trying to stay positive. He told me he was a widower, that he'd lost his wife several years before and was trying to figure out how to take care of himself." The words hit me like a slap. "He told you he was a widower?" "Yes, poor thing. He said losing his wife had been the hardest thing he'd ever gone through, but that meeting me had given him hope again." Helena's eyes grew misty. "He was so good to Sophia and me. I can't believe he's gone." I felt sick, not just because of Conrad's lie, but because of the genuine love in Helena's voice. Whatever else he'd done, Conrad had clearly made this woman and her daughter very happy. "Helena, how long were you and Conrad together?" 16 wonderful years. We weren't married officially. He said he wasn't ready for that step after losing his first wife. But we were committed to each other. He was Sophia's real father in every way that mattered. 16 years. Sophia's entire life. Conrad had been playing house with this woman while I'd been at home, believing we had a solid marriage. Did he ever talk about his first wife?" Helena nodded sadly. "Sometimes. He said her name was Marie and that she'd died in a car accident. He felt guilty about moving on, about being happy again. I tried to tell him that she would have wanted him to find love, but he carried that grief for a long time." Marie. He'd named his fictional dead wife Marie, probably because it was close enough to Muriel that he wouldn't slip up and use my real name. "Helena, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be very difficult to hear." Something in my tone must have alarmed her because her smile faded. "What is it? Is something wrong? Did Conrad owe money to someone?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope David Garrett had given me. Conrad wasn't a widower. He was married. To me. For 43 years. Helena stared at the papers I handed her, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing horror as she processed what she was reading. This can't be right. Conrad would never. He wasn't the kind of man who would lie about something like that. He was, Helena. I'm sorry, but he was. Her hands trembled as she looked through the documents, our marriage certificate, bank statements showing the monthly transfers to her account, the deed to this house with both their names on it. You're his wife? His actual wife? I was. Until 3 months ago, I thought I was happily married. I had no idea you existed. Helena stood up abruptly and began pacing, much like Marcus had done in my kitchen a few days earlier. But where Marcus had been defensive, Helena looked shattered. This is impossible. We lived together, planned our future together. He was here for Sophia's birth, her first steps, every birthday. every school play. How could he have another life? How could I not have known? He was very careful. He told me his consulting work required travel, sometimes overnight trips. He said he was working with clients in different cities, but the house. He helped me buy this house. We picked it out together, with $50,000 from accounts I didn't know existed. Helena sank back onto the sofa, her face pale. All those years. He was lying to me every single day? I nodded, watching this woman's world crumble the same way mine had a week earlier. But I wasn't done yet. There was more she needed to know. Helena, there's something else. Conrad made a new will 6 months before he died. He left everything to you and Sophia. His house, his savings, his life insurance, everything. But you're his wife. How can that be legal? I don't know yet. My lawyer is looking into it. But Helena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did Conrad ever give you any indication that he might be married? Any phone calls he took in private? Any times when he seemed secretive? Helena was quiet for a long time, thinking. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. There were things, little things that never quite made sense. He never wanted to take trips during certain times of year, holidays, our anniversary. He said he got too emotional remembering Marie during those times. What else? He never let Sophia or me visit his house. He said it was too painful, that he kept it exactly like it was when Marie was alive. And sometimes he would get phone calls that he'd take outside. He said it was work, but he always seemed stressed after. Those would have been calls from me, from Marcus, from our real life intruding on his fantasy. Helena, I'm not here to take away your grief or to tell you that what you had with Conrad wasn't real. It clearly was real to him, and to you. But I need you to understand something. That man you loved, who was a father to Sophia, he was living a lie every moment he spent with you. Tears were streaming down Helena's face now. Why are you telling me this? What do you want? I want to understand how a man could live 2 completely separate lives for 16 years. I want to understand how he could plan to abandon a woman who'd stood by him through everything. Abandon you? Helena looked confused through her tears. He was planning to leave me for you. The will was just the first step. If he hadn't died, I believe he would have divorced me eventually. Helena shook her head violently. No, that's not possible. Conrad never talked about getting married again. He said he couldn't bear to go through another ceremony because it would feel like betraying Marie's memory. Or because he was already married. The front door opened, and Sophia bounced in with the energy of a teenager coming home from school. She stopped short when she saw me sitting with her mother, both of us clearly upset. Mom? What's wrong? Who's this? Helena wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself. Sophia, this is Muriel. She was a friend of Conrad's. Sophia's face brightened immediately. Really? Did you know my dad well? Mom doesn't get to talk to many people who knew him. I looked at this beautiful 16-year-old girl with Conrad's eyes and Marcus's smile, and felt my heart break for her. Sophia had no idea that her entire life was built on a lie, that the father she'd adored had been living a double life since the day she was born. I knew him for a very long time, I said carefully. Wasn't he the best? He was so funny and smart, and he always had time for me no matter how busy he was with work. I really miss him. Helena stood up quickly. Sophia, honey, why don't you go start your homework? Muriel and I are just finishing up. After Sophia disappeared upstairs, Helena turned back to me, her expression harder than it had been before. What do you want from me? From us? Are you here to take our house? To destroy what little we have left of him? I looked around the living room again, at all the photos of the family Conrad had chosen over the one he'd been born into, at the evidence of 16 years of love and lies. Helena, I honestly don't know what I want yet, but I think you deserve to know the truth about the man you loved, and I think Sophia deserves to know the truth about her father. You can't tell her. Please. She's just lost him, and she worships his memory. This would destroy her. The way it destroyed me when I found out? Helena had no answer for that. As I drove home, I thought about what I'd learned. Conrad hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed Helena too. She'd spent 16 years loving a man who didn't exist, raising a daughter with a father who was living a complete fiction. But she'd also gotten 16 years of happiness, of feeling loved and chosen. 16 years of Conrad at his best, freed from the responsibilities and disappointments of his real life. I'd gotten 43 years of Conrad at his most ordinary, his most tired, his most resentful. I'd gotten the man who felt trapped, while Helena had gotten the man who felt free. The question now was what to do with all this knowledge. I could destroy Helena's world the way mine had been destroyed. I could fight for my legal rights and take everything Conrad had tried to leave her, or I could find another way. Something that would give me justice without destroying an innocent 16-year-old girl who'd just lost the only father she'd ever known. But first, I had to decide. Was Helena Martinez truly innocent, or had she known more about Conrad's real life than she was admitting? Because something about her story didn't quite add up, and I was beginning to suspect that Conrad Morrison wasn't the only one who'd gotten good at living a lie. 3 days after my confrontation with Helena, I couldn't sleep again. It was 2 a.m, and I found myself wandering through my house like a ghost, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt foreign. Conrad's reading glasses on the coffee table, his favorite coffee mug in the dishwasher, the crossword puzzle book he'd been working through, still open to a half-finished puzzle. I'd been avoiding his home office since his death. It was a small room off the kitchen where he'd handled his consulting work and our finances, or at least, that's what I'd thought he was doing in there. Now I wondered what other secrets might be hiding behind that closed door. The office smelled like his cologne and old paper. His desk was neat, organized the way Conrad had always kept everything. But as I sat in his chair and began opening drawers, I realized I'd never really looked through his things before. In 43 years of marriage, I'd respected his privacy, trusted him completely. The first few drawers contained exactly what I'd expected: old tax returns, instruction manuals for appliances, warranties for equipment we'd bought years ago. But when I pulled out the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, I felt something shift. The drawer seemed shorter than it should be, as if there was a hidden compartment behind the files. My fingers found a small metal tab tucked behind the back panel. When I pulled it, a false bottom slid away, revealing a space I'd never known existed. Inside were 3 manila folders, thick with papers, and a small metal lockbox. The first folder was labeled HM, in Conrad's precise handwriting, Helena Martinez. I opened it with trembling hands and found myself staring at 16 years of meticulous documentation. Bank statements showing every transfer to Helena's account, copies of mortgage documents for her house, even receipts for gifts he'd bought Sophia over the years, birthday presents, Christmas gifts, school supplies. But what made my blood run cold were the letters. Dozens of them, written in Conrad's hand but never sent. Draft after draft of the same basic message. Muriel, I've tried to find a way to tell you this gently, but there isn't one. I've fallen in love with someone else. Her name is Helena, and she has a daughter who feels like my own child. I know this will hurt you, but I can't keep living a lie. I want a divorce. The letters were dated going back 8 years. 8 years Conrad had been planning to leave me, writing and rewriting his confession, never quite finding the courage to deliver it. The second folder was even worse. It was labeled MM, Marcus Morrison. Inside were copies of emails between Conrad and our son, going back 5 years. I read through them with growing horror and rage. From Conrad, Marcus, I've made my decision about Helena. I'm going to ask your mother for a divorce after the holidays. I wanted you to know first because this will affect your inheritance. From Marcus, Dad, are you sure about this? Mom's going to be devastated. And what about the house? From Conrad, the house will go to Helena and Sophia. They need security more than your mother does. Muriel will get the apartment complex we inherited from her parents. That should be enough for her to live on. The apartment complex. I'd forgotten about those 2 small buildings my parents had left me. They generated maybe $800 a month in rental income. Conrad had planned to leave me with $800 a month while giving Helena everything else we'd built together. From Marcus. What if I contest the divorce settlement? What if I fight for Mom? From Conrad. Then you'll get nothing when I die. I'm redoing my will to reflect my new priorities. You can stand with your mother and get $25,000, or you can accept my decision and remain my primary heir along with Helena and Sophia. From Marcus. I understand, Dad. I won't cause problems. I stared at that last email for a long time. Marcus had known for 5 years exactly what Conrad was planning. He'd known his father intended to abandon me, and he'd chosen to stay silent to protect his own inheritance. Only now it turned out Conrad had lied to him too, leaving him almost nothing in the secret will. The third folder contained something that made me physically sick. It was labeled Justifications, and contained what appeared to be Conrad's personal journal entries, documenting every perceived slight, every moment of unhappiness in our marriage that he'd used to justify his betrayal. Muriel was cold to me at dinner tonight. She barely spoke, just asked about my day in that mechanical way she has. She doesn't really see me anymore. Muriel fell asleep during the movie again. She works too hard, but she won't listen when I tell her to slow down. She's always been stubborn that way. Muriel forgot our anniversary dinner. Said she was confused about the date, but I think she just doesn't care anymore. Helena would never forget something that important to me. Entry after entry, years of small domestic moments twisted into evidence of my failure as a wife. The night I'd fallen asleep during a movie because I'd worked a double shift to help pay for Marcus's college tuition. The anniversary dinner I'd mixed up because Conrad had told me he wanted to go out Friday when he'd meant Saturday. The cold dinner conversation he'd complained about. The same night I'd found out my best friend had been diagnosed with cancer and was too upset to make small talk. Conrad had taken every human moment, every sign of exhaustion or distraction or simple humanity, and used it to build a case against our marriage. He'd rewritten our entire history to make himself the victim and me the villain. But the lockbox contained the worst discovery of all. Inside were copies of legal documents I'd never seen before. Conrad had consulted a divorce attorney 2 years ago. He'd gotten valuations on our house, our savings accounts, even my jewelry. He'd planned everything down to the last detail. There was also a letter from the attorney, dated just 6 months before Conrad's death. Conrad, based on our discussions, I strongly advise against the approach you're considering. Transferring assets to a third party before filing for divorce could be considered fraudulent conveyance. If your wife has a competent attorney, she could have those transfers reversed, and you could face serious legal consequences. At the bottom of the letter, Conrad had handwritten a note. What if I die before filing? Would the transfers still be considered fraudulent? My hands shook as I read those words. Conrad hadn't just been planning to leave me. He'd been planning to die first, to avoid the legal consequences of his betrayal by leaving everything to Helena through his will instead of through a divorce settlement. Had he known about his heart condition? Had he intentionally avoided proper medical care, hoping to die before he had to face the consequences of his lies? I thought about the months before his death, how he'd refused to see a cardiologist despite experiencing chest pains, how he'd dismissed my concerns about his diet, his stress levels, his need for exercise. I'd thought he was just being stubborn, but now I wondered if he'd been hoping for a way out that would let him escape without having to look me in the eye and admit what he'd done. The final piece of paper in the lockbox was a handwritten note, dated just 2 weeks before Conrad's death. If something happens to me, Helena and Sophia will be taken care of. Muriel will fight it, but she'll lose. Marcus knows the truth and won't help her. My only regret is that I won't be there to see Helena's face when she realizes she doesn't have to share me anymore. I sat in that chair for hours, surrounded by the evidence of my husband's calculated betrayal. This wasn't a man who'd fallen in love and made impulsive decisions. This was a man who'd spent years methodically planning to destroy his family while maintaining a facade of loving devotion. When the sun finally came up, I felt like a different person. The grieving widow was gone, replaced by something harder, smarter, more determined. Conrad thought he'd been clever, covering all his bases, manipulating everyone in his life to get what he wanted. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. I gathered all the documents and put them back in the lockbox, but I made copies of everything first. Then I called David Garrett's office and left a message requesting an emergency meeting. By 9 that morning, I was sitting across from my attorney again. But this time, I wasn't the confused, heartbroken woman who discovered her husband's betrayal. This time, I knew exactly what Conrad had done and exactly how to fight back. David, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. If Conrad had lived and filed for divorce, would he have been able to keep these assets from me? David examined the documents I'd brought, his expression growing more serious as he read. Absolutely not. These transfers to Helena Martinez would be considered fraudulent conveyance. Any competent family law attorney would have had them reversed within months. And the fact that he died before filing for divorce? That complicates things, but it doesn't make the transfers legal. If we can prove he intended to defraud you of your marital assets, we can still challenge them. I leaned forward. David, I want you to file whatever papers are necessary to contest Conrad's second will. I want every transfer to Helena Martinez investigated. And I want you to look into whether Marcus can be held liable as a co-conspirator, since he knew about Conrad's plans and helped conceal them. Mrs. Morrison, are you sure about this? Legal battles can be expensive and emotionally draining. I thought about Helena's beautiful house, paid for with money that should have been mine. I thought about Sophia, the daughter Conrad had chosen over the son he'd raised. I thought about Marcus, who'd sold out his own mother for an inheritance that turned out to be worthless. Most of all, I thought about Conrad's handwritten note. My only regret is that I won't be there to see Helena's face when she realizes she doesn't have to share me anymore. He'd planned to hurt me one last time, even from the grave. I'm absolutely sure, David. Conrad spent years planning to destroy my life. Now it's my turn to plan. But I wasn't just planning a legal battle. I was planning something Conrad had never expected. Something that would give me justice and peace in ways he'd never imagined. Because while Conrad had been busy documenting my failures as a wife, he'd forgotten to cover his tracks as a liar. And Helena Martinez was about to learn exactly what kind of man she'd been mourning. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my house now, legally and completely, preparing dinner for one. The late afternoon sun slanted through windows I'd recently had cleaned, casting golden light on surfaces that were finally, truly mine. The legal battle had been swift and decisive. David Garrett had been right about the fraudulent conveyance laws. Once we presented evidence of Conrad's systematic plan to hide marital assets, the court had no choice but to invalidate his secret will and restore everything to the marital estate. Helena's house, the monthly payments, even the car Conrad had helped her buy. All of it had to be returned or compensated for. But money, I'd learned, was only part of the justice I'd been seeking. The real turning point had come when I'd made a decision that surprised even David. Instead of pursuing Helena and Sophia for every penny they owed, I'd offered them a settlement that would let them keep the house. Mrs. Morrison, David had said during one of our final meetings, you're entitled to much more. Why are you being so generous with them? The answer was simple, though I'd never told him the whole truth. Helena and Sophia were victims too, in their own way. They'd been living a lie just as completely as I had, and destroying their home wouldn't bring back the years Conrad had stolen from me. But more importantly, my real victory had come through a conversation that would stay with Helena Martinez for the rest of her life. I'd asked to meet with her one final time before the settlement was finalized. She'd been understandably wary, expecting me to gloat or make demands. Instead, I'd brought her something that changed everything. I want you to have these, I'd said, placing a manila envelope on her kitchen table. What are they? Copies of letters your Conrad wrote but never sent. Letters where he planned how to leave me for you. But also letters where he complained about you, Helena. Letters where he called you needy, where he worried about how expensive Sophia was becoming, where he wondered if he'd made a mistake. Helena's face had gone pale as she read Conrad's private thoughts, his doubts about their relationship, his complaints about her weight gain after Sophia's birth, his irritation when she'd asked him to attend her work Christmas party. "There's more," I'd continued quietly. Diary entries where he wrote about other women he found attractive. His nurse during physical therapy, the checkout girl at the grocery store, even Sophia's math teacher. The papers had trembled in Helena's hands as she'd read entry after entry revealing that the man she'd mourned as perfect had been just as human, just as flawed, and just as capable of betrayal as any other man. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to understand something, Helena. Conrad didn't leave me because I failed him, and he didn't love you because you were perfect. He left me because he was selfish, and he would have eventually left you too. That's who he was." I'd watched her face as the truth settled in. The realization that her 16 years of happiness had been built on the same foundation of lies that had supported our 43-year marriage. The Conrad you loved, the devoted father and partner, that man existed because you didn't know about me. The moment you became his real life instead of his escape, he would have started looking for a new escape. You would have become the wife he complained about in his diary, and some other woman would have become his salvation. Helena had been quiet for a long time after that. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I want you to keep the house, raise Sophia, live your life. But I want you to remember that the man you're mourning was a fiction. The real Conrad Morrison was the man who could write love letters to you in the morning and complaints about you in the evening." That conversation had been 3 months ago, and I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Helena had quietly started seeing a counselor. She'd also apparently cleaned out Conrad's belongings from her house and donated them all to charity. The shrine to perfect love had been dismantled, replaced by a more honest understanding of what she'd actually lost. As for Marcus, our relationship had ended exactly as it deserved to. When he'd learned about the legal challenge to Conrad's will, he'd shown up at my house demanding to know why I was destroying the family over money. "The family was destroyed 5 years ago when you chose to lie to me," I'd told him. "I'm just making it official." He'd tried to argue, to claim he'd been protecting me, but I'd had Conrad's emails printed out and ready to show him. "Your father offered you a choice, Marcus. Stand with your mother and get $25,000, or betray her and remain his heir. You chose betrayal. Now you get exactly what that choice was worth." The last time I'd seen him, he'd been clearing his few remaining possessions from my garage, muttering about lawyers and family loyalty. But he'd never actually hired an attorney to contest my decisions, probably because David Garrett had made it clear that Marcus's knowledge of Conrad's plans might make him legally liable as well. Sometimes I felt sad about losing my relationship with my son. But more often, I felt relieved to be free of someone who'd proven he couldn't be trusted with my well-being. Today marked exactly 1 year since Conrad's death, and 6 months since I'd taken control of my own life. I'd used some of the recovered assets to renovate the house. New paint, new furniture, new everything that didn't carry memories of the man who'd lived here under false pretenses. I'd also done something Conrad would have hated. I'd started dating. Richard was a widower I'd met through a grief support group. Ironic, considering my grief had turned out to be more complicated than most. He'd lost his wife to cancer after 35 years of what he described as a genuinely happy marriage. He was kind, honest, and had no interest in games or deception. Our relationship was slow, careful, built on conversations rather than grand gestures. He knew about Conrad's betrayal, about the legal battles, about my estrangement from Marcus. He'd listened without judgment and offered perspective without trying to fix everything. "You know what I admire most about you?" he'd said just last week as we'd walked through the botanical garden downtown. "What's that?" "You didn't let them turn you bitter. You got angry. You fought for what was yours, but you didn't let it poison you." He was right. I'd been tempted by bitterness, especially in those first weeks after discovering the truth. But somewhere along the way, I'd realized that carrying Conrad's poison would only continue his work of destroying my life. Instead, I'd chosen to build something new. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Richard stood on my porch, holding a bottle of wine and wearing the slightly nervous smile he got when he wasn't sure about something. "I hope I'm not too early. I brought that vintage you mentioned liking." "Perfect timing," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Dinner's almost ready." As we sat down to eat, Richard raised his glass. "What shall we toast to?" I thought about Helena Martinez, living in her house with a more honest understanding of the man who'd bought it for her. I thought about Marcus, somewhere across town, learning to live with the consequences of his choices. I thought about Sophia, who would grow up knowing her father had been human rather than perfect, which might just save her from making the same mistakes her mother and I had made. Most of all, I thought about Conrad, who'd spent years planning a future he'd never lived to see, believing he could control everyone and everything from beyond the grave. "To new beginnings," I said, clinking my glass against Richard's, "and to the wisdom that comes from surviving other people's lies." Later that evening, after Richard had gone home and I was getting ready for bed, I found myself standing in what had once been Conrad's home office. I'd converted it into a reading room, filled with books and comfortable chairs and plants that thrived in the southern light. There was no trace left of the man who'd once sat here planning my destruction. His desk was gone, his files were gone, his secrets were gone. In their place was a room designed entirely for my own pleasure, my own peace. On the small table by the window sat a single framed photograph, not of Conrad or Marcus or the family I'd thought I had, but of myself on my 68th birthday last month. Richard had taken it during our trip to the coast, and in it I was laughing at something he'd said, my face turned toward the sun. I looked happy. Not the careful, managed happiness I'd worn for 43 years of marriage, but something genuine and unguarded. The happiness of a woman who'd learned the difference between being loved and being needed, between being valued and being used. Conrad had bet everything on my weakness, on my willingness to accept whatever scraps of affection he offered. He'd counted on my fear of being alone, my need to keep the family together at any cost. He'd been wrong about all of it. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to my bedroom. My bedroom now, decorated exactly as I wanted it, filled with the kind of peace that comes from sleeping without lies. Tomorrow, I would wake up in a house that truly belonged to me, in a life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. I would have coffee with Richard, tend my garden, maybe call the few friends I'd been reconnecting with since freeing myself from the exhausting work of pretending to be happy. I would live the life Conrad had tried to steal from me, but better than he'd ever imagined possible. Because the greatest victory wasn't getting back what he'd tried to take away. The greatest victory was discovering I'd never needed any of it in the first place. All I'd ever needed was the truth, the courage to face it, and the wisdom to build something real from whatever remained. And now, finally, I had all three. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.